For the Chicago Bears to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they need to neutralize the blitzes coming from Todd Bowles' defense, and they need to make Baker Mayfield uncomfortable early.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first ticket purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. On the show today, we put together a game plan for how the Chicago Bears can bounce back from Week 1, beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Week 2, and get this season back on track. We'll start with what we're expecting from Todd Bowles' defense, which is a ton of blitzing. What the Bears can do to try and neutralize that, get Justin Fields into a rhythm early, and keep that throughout the course of the game. Then we'll look at what the Bears can do to disrupt Baker Mayfield and why I didn't really come away from their game against the Vikings super impressed by the Buccaneers across the board. And of course, we're going to look at the biggest matchups that are going to decide this game that the Bears need to win in order to come out on top. If there's one thing we know about Todd Bowles' defenses, is that he likes to get after opposing quarterbacks. We've seen him do it against Justin Fields in previous matchups and against the Bears over the years, but also last week against the Minnesota Vikings. They blitzed Kirk Cousins over 50% of his dropbacks. They were bringing some kind of extra pass rusher or, bringing a pass rusher, even if it's a four-man rush, from a different spot. Dropping a defensive lineman in coverage, bringing some sort of abnormal pass rush that is not just a straight-up, regular four-man rush, where all four rushers are going to come from. They like to confuse quarterbacks and especially try and disrupt young quarterbacks or quarterbacks they think they can challenge, like Justin Fields. When I watched the Buccaneers last week against the Vikings, it really didn't feel to me like, the individual pass rushers. It was less about them winning great matchups, but some of it was about getting better matchups. But it wasn't like any individual pass rusher took over and dominated, right? It wasn't like, Vita Vea in the middle or whatever went off for a huge pass rushing performance. Devin White got home on a handful of blitzes there where he was able to kind of run free or run around a running back or a tight end instead of a linebacker, or instead of an offensive lineman. You certainly had Shaq Barrett and Joe Tryon certainly got a couple pressures in there too. Their edge rushers are definitely the strength of their pass rush, but really it's the extra rushers and what those extra rushers do to either free up somebody to have a free run to the quarterback or get a plus pass rusher against a running back or a tight end or somebody in the backfield that isn't going to be able to block them as well. And it's less about the individual skill of the individual pass rusher just dominating the offensive lineman in front of them. So for the Chicago Bears, I think that's partially good news in the sense that it's not like there's just going to be one pass rush matchup that they can try and exploit, although we certainly have concerns about the Bears offensive line, but also then it puts the onus on the sort of scheme battle that comes from that then. It's okay, they're going to get their pressure not by their one-on-one matchups per se, but by the play call, where the pass rush is coming from, trying to confuse the offensive line and the protections to sort of out-strategize you in this game of chess of pass pro versus pass rush. In order to beat the blitz, then you've got a couple of different options. You either need to leave blockers in to make sure you pick up everybody to give Justin Fields time to throw even when facing a blitz, or B, you need to get rid of the ball more quickly than the blitz can get home. And certainly over the course of a ball game, right, you can't just do one strategy for the entire game. You're going to have to do some of both. There are going to be times when the blitz is coming and you need to pick it up properly. It's third and long or, second and long, and you need time to throw, and you need your tight end to pick somebody up and your running back to pick somebody up and all five of your offensive linemen to block 7 guys total, 7 blockers on 7 pass rushers, and guys got to hold up for 2.5, 3 seconds for Fields to be able to throw some of these balls downfield. You're going to need some of that, but you're also going to need quicker 3-step drops, slant routes, quick curls, dragging routes, crossing routes underneath, stuff that doesn't take a long time to develop because there's going to be a linebacker coming, a safety coming, a slot cornerback coming. Those tend to be the main areas where the Buccaneers look for the blitzes. You don't typically see a ton of, Carlton Davis and Jamil Dean, the outside cornerbacks really coming, but it's linebackers and safety primarily, and then the slot cornerback as well quite a bit in there. Or sometimes it's just, 3 defensive linemen and 2 edge rushers is a 5-man rush. That's a blitz, and you can get some different guys there. So to me, it's about being ready to pick it up when you need to with tight ends and making sure your protections are set. It's getting more quick passing going. You can also sometimes roll out away from the blitzes. That's a dangerous game because if you roll into the blitz, you're going to have a sack. If Fields is blitzing to his right side and there's a slot cornerback on that side, and that slot cornerback is blitzing, he's going to make a beeline for Fields and not really care about the rollout, like the play action side of things, and bring him down. But if you can roll out, if you have a play where you have a single receiver to one side and just an outside cornerback against him and no safety up at the line of scrimmage, you can feel like you can roll out to that side because there's no one over there that's going to blitz at the quarterback. And if the blitz comes from the side you're rolling away from, then you're already running away from the blitz at the snap, and you'll have time for your quarterback to throw. So you can roll out intelligently and kind of know, okay, where are my defenders pre-snap? Who could be blitzing, and am I rolling out into a potential blitzer, or am I rolling away from potential blitzers? If you can roll away, that should be effective. And also, screen passes. I know we were super frustrated by the screen passes last week. The blocking was terrible, and it felt like they went to it a few too many times. But if the team's going to blitz and try and get downhill, you draw them in, and then you dump it off behind them on a screen pass, and half of their secondary or half of their defense is in your backfield, and the ball's already behind them with blockers in front of them to run downfield. There's less guys back there to tackle the screen player. That's a pretty successful strategy if you can get it off and if you can actually block it up properly. Same goes with like a draw play. Again, dangerous game, depends on where the blitz is coming from, but if you can draw them in and then hand it off quick and have them run past the blitzers before they can get to the ball carrier, there's some different options there. So there is strategy towards beating the blitz. And if they can stay ahead of the blitz, I think Justin Fields in this offense can be just fine against this Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And then it comes on this Bears defense to do a better job this week against Baker Mayfield than they did last week against Jordan Love and Aaron Jones. We'll take a closer look at what we can expect from Tampa Bay's offense and what the Bears can do to counteract it next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Gametime is the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events, whether it's sports like Bears games. They've always got good deals on Bears games on Gametime, but otherwise concerts, comedy shows, theater, and so much more. What I love about Gametime is it kind of compiles it all for me, so I get to see what all is happening in my city. You know what I mean? Sometimes if you want to like see what bands are in town, you got to go to each venue's website or the ticket sales like place that the one company that they might use. But Gametime has everything at all times, so then you can know what's around. You got a free day on a weekend and you want to grab a good deal on some tickets. That's what I love Gametime for. Plus, they've got flash deals on tickets to save you extra money, great last minute prices, and more. So snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. The film against the Vikings last week for Baker Mayfield and this Buccaneers offense was a little bit deceiving. If you watched the game or if you've gone back and watched it, the Buccaneers offense in the first half was pretty abysmal. They couldn't get anything going. They couldn't run the ball for the majority of the game, if at all. I mean, occasionally they break a couple of yards here and there, but for the most part, they couldn't consistently move the ball on the ground. And in the passing game, it took them a while to get some things going. They got a big touchdown right before halftime and then came out in the second half with much better offense. And I think there's some, I don't want to say some asterisks there, but just some explanation there. A couple things. First of all, they went up against a Vikings defense with Brian Flores as defensive coordinator, who also likes to blitz a lot. The two quarterbacks who were blitzed the most in week one were Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield. They were the two defenses that blitzed the most, played against each other. These were two of the most blitz-heavy teams in the NFL going head-to-head. So that shaped some of what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were doing offensively. I think it also shaped some of their inability to run the ball because Brian Flores is also bringing run blitzes in that. We talk about blitzing in terms of getting after the quarterback, but run blitzes are also a factor in that. They like to be aggressive in Minnesota, and they were aggressive against this Buccaneers front, the offensive line and running game. In general, I don't think the Buccaneers have particularly talented, like, game-changing running backs. Like, Rachaad White has some potential for sure, and I like Chase Edmonds as a backup there, but, like, they don't have elite running backs. They've got fine running backs, but they're not great running backs that scare you the way maybe that Aaron Jones was able to do a little bit of extra damage this past week. Bigger problem for the Buccaneers, though, is the interior of their offensive line, particularly the right half of their offensive line. But starting with the center, Robert Hainsey, the right guard, the rookie Cody Mauch from North Dakota State, who I loved coming out of the draft out of North Dakota State, small school kid, an absolute lumberjack of a man if you haven't Googled him and seen his picture with the missing teeth. He kind of looks like somewhere between like Thor and a lumberjack. Really funny looking dude, but a good football player and a good guy. I interviewed him a couple times down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Really rooting for that kid's success, but week one, it's a rookie, little bit of a rough start. And the right tackle, Luke Gadecki, was Godecki. I never know how to say that. He was up and down for them too. So right side of that offensive line, rough, especially the center and the right guard combo. Does that sound familiar to anybody from last week? Any other teams had a rough center right guard performance last week with some questions about the right tackle? Yeah. I wonder where I've heard that one before. But still, it's something that you can certainly attack as a defense. I think that contributed to their struggles in the running game quite a bit. And then in the passing game, couldn't really get things going until the end of the first half. Baker Mayfield hits Mike Evans on a 28-yard touchdown, kind of a double move, fakes the corner and then posts across the face of the safety, splits the two deep safeties. Really nice play by Mike Evans. Really nice play by Baker Mayfield, who on that play had time in the pocket. Pass protection, picked up a linebacker blitz, could stand in there, wait for Mike Evans to run his double move and made a nice play on the safety. Really, that's kind of what got their offense going. And then Baker Mayfield comes into the halftime, and his running back Rachaad White said in an interview that Baker Mayfield picked up on the Vikings' defensive signals. So then when the Vikings linebackers would change their coverage, he knew what coverage they were going to be in, and that opened some things up for them in the second half. Somehow he was able to kind of decipher, okay, every time they make this hand signal or this word, their coverage keeps changing this way. And for whatever reason, he was able to pick that up and have a much better sense of what the Vikings were doing to try and stop him. So I think that's going to be something that kind of, changes the balance here a little bit, right? Presumably, the Bears should keep Baker Mayfield from picking up on their signals. And if he doesn't pick up on the Viking signals, does the Buccaneers offense pick up in the second half the way that it did in that game? Or did they end up losing because they couldn't get anything going offensively up until that point? So I think that kind of muddies the water here a little bit on how good to expect the Buccaneers to be, because they kind of knew what they were going up against almost not every play, but quite often out there. A couple of structural things from them. All the deep shots were going to Mike Evans, and he's the one that's going vertical, so you got to stay on top of him. Safety's always got to be aware of where 13 is in terms of staying deeper than him and not letting them get past them. Chris Godwin was doing more of the intermediate work, the short routes and the intermediate routes, working over the middle of the field, kind of like what we saw Jordan Love go to over and over again last week against the Bears. Godwin's the guy you got to watch out there. Evans is the one you got to watch out more vertical, deep shot downfield. So that's certainly where I think the Bears, you got to know your matchups and know where we think this player might want to go and overplay Mike on the deep stuff. And maybe you play Godwin a little bit more over the middle and underneath, right? You're not worried about as much about him going deep on you from a scheme and a game plan standpoint. Both guys are capable of more, but just what the Buccaneers may emphasize with them, you can be on top of that a bit more. So I think it's a combination of those things, right? Like staying on top of those biggest threats, because the running backs don't scare you a ton. The tight ends certainly don't scare you at all. And the wide receivers not named Mike Evans and Chris Godwin don't really scare you at all. So you stay on top of those two, you're feeling all right. And you don't let Baker Mayfield steal your defensive signals, you're doing all right. And if you can get some pressure on the weak points of their offensive line, their left side of their offensive line is really solid. It's going to be a tough matchup for Ngakoue, and you need him to try and still be able to win one-on-one with Tristan Wirfs sometimes. But you bring some pressure from the other side, you get some different looks for Baker Mayfield, you don't let him steal your signals. I feel like you're ultimately sitting in a pretty good spot defensively there, where, this is only a team that put up 20 points last week. This is not a high-flying offense, but once they get into that rhythm, they can be tough to stop. But it took them a while to get there. So don't let them get comfortable early. Stay aggressive, stay on top of things, stay on your keys, know what they're going to want to try and do, force them to adjust and adapt their offense and take away the things that they want to do in terms of throwing it downfield to Evans and over the middle to Chris Godwin, trying to get the running game going to help Baker Mayfield. Like, don't give them that. Make them have to innovate in other ways and beat you with, a tight end like Cade Otton, or running backs like Rashad White and Chase Edmonds, and receivers like Trey Palmer and Raheem Jarrett and Devon Tompkins. Those are not necessarily household names there. So I think there's a real opportunity here for the Bears defense to bounce back against this Buccaneers offense. It's just a matter of whether this Bears offense can withstand the blitz and get things going off on that side of the ball to score enough points to ultimately win this game. It's going to come down to winning some of those key one-on-one matchups. We can talk all we want about X's and O's and scheme, but individual players and talent is what ultimately wins out. And we'll go through the matchups that the Bears need to win, the ones that are most critical for success in this game, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy that's designed to help you be your best self. It's really been something that's beneficial for me in my life. I do online therapy every single week, at home, virtual, just like with BetterHelp. You meet with a therapist and you just talk through what's going on in your life, right? It's not about being in crisis or being broken or anything like that. It's about being your best self. I think of it as like going to the gym, but for my brain. I don't go to the gym because my body is broken, but I go to the gym because I want my body to be better, stronger, its best self. And therapy is the same way for me. Like, I want to be as mentally healthy, strong, and resilient and happy as possible, and therapy is really important for that. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, BetterHelp is a great way to get started because it's entirely online, it's convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This episode of Locked On Bears is also brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to do daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you can get up to 25 times your money back on your entry just by picking players that you think are going to perform well or not so well this week. So with PrizePicks, they set projections for each player across all sports, not just the NFL, but especially in the NFL where we love to watch. And then you decide whether these players will do better or worse than their PrizePicks projection. And if you get your picks right, you're going to be racking in some major cash. It's a really fun way to give you some odds and some stakes and some kind of like excitement for games that you might not otherwise watch or you might not otherwise have a rooting interest in. But if your PrizePicks picks are saying, oh man, I need DeAndre Swift or any kind of Derrick Henry to rush for a certain amount of yards, that's what makes it that much more fun. And PrizePicks is the best, most fun way to do it. You got to check it out. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's an extra $100 to play at prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. It's not going to be easy for the Chicago Bears to win all their key one-on-one matchups, but the more of these they can win, the better they're going to do. And that's ultimately, like, you can scheme up and plan everything you can, but at some point, Lucas Patrick has to block Vita Vea in the running game. We talked about it on yesterday's Crossover Thursday podcast with James Yarko from Locked On Buccaneers. Go take a listen to that if you want more in-depth analysis on this Bears-Bucks matchup, especially the local perspective from somebody who covers the Buccaneers every single day. So I don't want to rehash the whole Vita Vea Lucas Patrick thing, but we know Patrick was bad last week. Vita Vea is like a 400-pound behemoth in the middle of that defensive line, who's a monster that's really hard for anyone to block, especially when your center might be struggling at this point. So that's a key matchup, particularly in the running game, but also certainly in pass protection. You got to be ready for Vita Vea there. One matchup that's really critical this week, Kyler Gordon just went on injured reserve. We'll see for how long, but regardless, your slot cornerback's out for the next minimum of 4 weeks with the hand injury. That means Josh Blackwell will be filling in as your top slot cornerback. We saw Blackwell play pretty well last season for an undrafted free agent, but big matchup this week against perhaps Chris Godwin, who used to play more in the slot for them in years past. In week 1, they didn't use him in the slot as much. They went to Devin Tompkins and Trey Palmer a little bit more there. So I'm curious to see if they should identify Josh Blackwell is a plus matchup, and if you can get Chris Godwin matched up on him in one-on-one situations, that's going to be tough for the Bears. You can't expect Blackwell to be able to handle that one-on-one all game long. Certainly in the slot, it's easier to help out with linebackers in zone coverage, or safeties over the top or coming down in zone coverage, passing off routes there. So it's not going to be all Blackwell versus Godwin, but that's certainly a matchup that the Bears are going to need Godwin, or going to need Blackwell to step up, whether it's Godwin or anyone else, but especially going up against a 1,000-yard receiver type like a Chris Godwin. That one can scare you a little bit. Certainly, the rest of the interior of the Buccaneers defensive line around Vita Vea doesn't scare me as much. So for me, that's kind of the big one with him and Lucas Patrick. But how about on the flip side? We talked about the Bears defensive line and really the vulnerability on the Buccaneers offensive line. That center, Robert Hainsey. He was a third-round pick a couple of years ago, has been inconsistent for them so far in his career. And so this is where Andrew Billings, the nose tackle of the Bears, and also Justin Jones, because they kind of both rotate, they need to win that matchup with him and Cody Mauch, the right guard there. I thought Andrew Billings last week against the Packers played really well, particularly in the running game, but showing some pass rush upside there too. He was one of the few defenders and few new additions that wasn't a disappointment against the Packers. I really thought he stepped up well, was aggressive, physical, and disruptive on the interior. It should be a great matchup for him. But in this Bears 4-3 scheme, depending on when they motion a tight end across the formation and shift the strength of the formation, your defensive tackles will shift. So your nose tackle will sometimes go to the 3 technique, and your 3 technique will sometimes go to the nose, and they need to be a little bit more interchangeable. So it's on Justin Jones to step up. Let's go. He was talking a lot of smack about the Packers in the offseason. Didn't really do anything in week 1. Need better and more from Justin Jones. Need him to be a more productive pass rusher in general, but also in the running game too. And Robert Hainsey is a great opportunity for those guys to get their one-on-one wins. Show that interior pressure that you need to give Yannick Ngakoue, some help. Somebody else to be able to step up. Or DeMarcus Walker rotates inside a lot on third downs into the defensive tackle spot. Can he get that matchup with that center and reward Ryan Poles for the big contract that the Chicago Bears gave him? Hainsey to me is the guy to attack. Blitz up the middle too. Send Tremaine Edmonds, send TJ Edwards, send Jack Sanborn right up that middle. Stunt guys inside to attack the center, but beat that center, beat that right guard, and get pressure right up in Baker Mayfield's face. That's going to go a long way towards disrupting the Buccaneers offense and giving your offense a chance to stay in this game. For the Bears offense, we talked about it in the crossover yesterday, how important DJ Moore is going to be when you're talking about trying to throw the ball quickly to beat the blitz and make your guys make plays after the catch. I think the Buccaneers missed one tackle defensively all of last week. They're a really sound tackling team. They're going to need to get the ball in the DJ Moore's hands a little bit more and have him make more plays. And they may be getting a very favorable matchup there because Carlton Davis missed practice the first 2 days of the week here, Thursday and Wednesday, with, I think, a toe injury. He played the entire game against the Vikings. It didn't appear to be anything he suffered during the game. As of the time I'm recording this podcast, we don't know what his status is for Sunday. We don't know where the injury was caused exactly, but the fact that he's missing multiple days of practice could mean that Carlton Davis is not able to go on Sunday. Even if he is, that's still the matchup, right? DJ Moore on the Panthers went up against Carlton Davis twice a year for a while there. A handful of seasons going back and forth. They know each other well. They're going to be prepared for each other, and the Bears need DJ Moore to win that matchup if Carlton Davis is on the field. If Carlton Davis can't play, it will likely be, I think, Zion McCollum, who was a 5th-round pick for them last season. Usually, a cornerback that you haven't heard of versus DJ Moore is a very favorable matchup for your team. Who knows, maybe they put Jameel Dean on Moore a little bit more and try and have Zion McCollum versus Chase Claypool and Darnell Mooney. By all means, sweet. Go for it. Their slot cornerback is also dealing with an injury, but he should play. But you should be able to find some favorable matchups against this Buccaneers secondary. That's part of the reason you blitz, right? Is so that these, especially with the injuries at cornerback, but the younger cornerbacks that they have don't have to then cover as long because in theory, the blitz will either get to the quarterback or make him throw it sooner. So the cornerbacks don't have to cover for 3, 4, 5 seconds downfield. Now, if Fields can escape some of those pressures and keep those cornerbacks having to cover longer and keep his eyes downfield, you got some opportunity to do some damage here. But it's really going to be, it's all about the blitz for me. It's all about the offensive line, the protection, and the scheme to stop the blitz. If the Bears can successfully avoid being so disrupted by that blitz and keep things moving for Fields and have the offense function in spite of the blitz, they're going to win this game. I mean, I think that's the number one factor here that ultimately comes down to. The problem is I don't fully trust, after what we saw in week 1, for the Bears to properly do that, but there's clearly a path towards victory here. It starts with the blitz, and I think you can find some advantages against the Buccaneers offense as well for your Bears defense, and you start to put together a formula and a game plan for how to beat this team. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you want to see the Bears do to win on Sunday. Leave us a comment here in the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. Click that like button as well while you're tuning in there, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears. You can post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group, or text me if you're a member of the Locked On Bears Insiders. The Locked On Bears Insiders group has a direct line to text me. It's joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears if you want to be a part of that group and get exclusive content, access to breakdowns, all 22 film, and so much more. Joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBears. However you interact with us, just make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. We'll be back on Monday to break down whatever happens in Bears Buccaneers. But in the meantime, over the weekend, make sure you still find some time to bear down.